We're delighted to welcome Professor Harriet Bulkeley at Durham University for an interview to celebrate International Women's Day as part of our Ustinov series. So the theme of International Women's Day this year is Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World, with the tagline Choose to Challenge. We're pleased to welcome Professor Harriet Bulkeley to speak about her experiences and career to date. So first of all, thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with us today.
That's a pleasure, Arabella. Nice to be here.
And as part of our activities for International Women's Day, could you begin by telling us a little bit more about yourself and your career to date?
Yes, I will. Thank you very much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be with you. I'm an academic geographer. I work here in the geography department at Durham University, where I've been for nearly 20 years. And I also have a position at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, where I'm part of the Copernicus Institute for Sustainable Development. And I think I've really always wanted to be a geographer. I had a small period of my teenage years where I thought I wanted to be a weather girl. That didn't last that long, but I was very fascinated by the weather. And this is in the 1980s, and of course, towards the late 1980s, then issues such as rainforest destruction and the hole in the ozone layer and climate change came to be sort of pressing social concerns, and that's, I think, what really attracted me to my professional career in geography, because I work on climate change as a social and political issue, and I'm interested in how societies respond to that issue. So yeah, that's a bit about my background. I hope that's enough for now. I'm sure I could go on about that for a long time, but yeah, that's what drew me in.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Yeah, really, really great. So then, second of all, so International Women's Day for this year focuses on women in leadership, and the slogan for this year is Choose to Challenge. What does that mean to you personally and also professionally, do you think?
Yeah, it's a very interesting slogan. I think most people who know me, either personally or professionally, will say that I'm never really shy of challenging things. That's probably one of my trademarks, is I'm always being quite outspoken. It comes quite naturally to me. I grew up in a household where both of my parents were quite involved in social protest movements, both in the peace movement and also in supporting people in Oxford, where I grew up, with their claims for asylum. And I think they, growing up in that household, they always, told me, they didn't even sort of tell me. I just grew up with a kind of idea that if you saw injustices around you, you should address them. And so I think that's always been, part of how I've grown up, both personally and professionally. But in terms of my professional career, I think I've taken, if you like, a more sort of inside track than I've possibly done all of my protesting before I was about 14. But I'm interested in how do you work within organisations to achieve change. So I'm interested in where are the places that you can challenge, what change can you achieve. And so I think, I've taken on different kinds of roles in terms of being part of policy advisory teams, working with business, working with NGOs to try to communicate what we know about what will work for society to address climate change, and to challenge those organisations to take a different kind of approach from the ones that they're used to and maybe more comfortable with. And then also professionally, I've had a very strong interest in sort of championing gender equality within the university system. And I was pleased to be part of a team in Durham that led some work on how our promotion system works, where we tried to develop a new approach that would take a more rounded view of people's career structures and allow both women and men to progress through the system more effectively, that the university has then since implemented. So I do think you can challenge from within the system, and you can change a lot by just identifying where the spaces for change really are. We've still got quite a long way to go on all of those issues, of course. But that would be my approach to sort of this idea of not being afraid to take on those challenges.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something that we could all kind of learn from, like learning to work with the system as well as, kind of criticizing it from a distance too. Yeah, that's a nice point. So next, you've been working on the Naturevation project, which involves a team of 80 researchers from 14 different institutes across 6 European countries. So as the coordinator for this really global project, how do you ensure that this team and this project remains cohesive and efficient? And do you think that the recent pandemic has impacted the way that your team works and how they conduct themselves? And do you think that the current global picture will change the way that you implement the project outcomes in the future going forward?
Yeah, it's been a great project to work with. Quite interestingly, one which has a majority of women in leadership positions throughout the whole team. And your question about cohesion and efficiency is really interesting, actually. And I'm not sure you can always have both at the same time, or at least not from the outset. And for me, in this team, which is funded, the project's funded under the European Union, so all colleagues work in Europe. For me, it's been a cohesion that's come first. So I've been really interested to understand my different colleagues' needs, but also what they're coming from, what drives them, what kind of combinations of colleagues working together I think can be effective, and trying to get a sort of maybe it sounds a bit corny, but it's a kind of team spirit in the project, and a kind of sense of the importance and interesting work that we're doing, and a really strong belief in individuals. Really, like I really believe in my team, and I think that really helps with the kind of coherence of the project. And I think the efficiency comes from that. I mean, I think people work efficiently if they want to work on a team, if they feel like they belong, if they feel like they like the culture, if they feel that they can express themselves. And I'm sure, there have been times along the way where not everybody has felt like that. But in general, I think it's worked in that way. I'm really pleased with the results that we've got. We're nearing the end of the project, so we've been lucky not to be too affected by the pandemic. We collected all of our data before the pandemic began, which I think is, for teams who are in the middle of data collection, it's a very different story. But for us, it's really been about the outreach side, which has been affected. So we had to move a whole set of things online. We had a very large kind of online in-person conference planned, which we had to move online. And it's given us a lot of added benefits, actually, because we could then invite speakers from different parts of the world. So we had WWF Cities team who are based in Latin America join us. We had colleagues from Australia join us who wouldn't have been able to participate. So it's given us a lot of advantages. But I think the key thing has been that everybody's been affected so differently. So especially in the first sort of 6 months, I had colleagues in Spain who were not allowed out of the house and had young children at home. And then I had colleagues in Sweden who were just living their normal lives. So, it was about everybody being able to pull together and redistribute work. So asking colleagues in Sweden to perhaps do a little bit more than they were planning to take off the burden from colleagues elsewhere who were feeling the pinch a bit more. But because we knew each other well enough by that stage that we could manage that. I think going forwards, you asked, how do I think the pandemic will affect the context in which the kinds of work that we've been doing will be taken up? So we've been looking at how nature can support action for climate change and biodiversity. And we can see that both of those global processes that we're supposed to have these big meetings last year to set in train the next 5 to 10 years of action globally, they've both been at least troubled, if not derailed, by the pandemic. And I think there are big questions about whether these kind of international negotiation processes can really work under these conditions, because they're so based on massive amounts of international travel and thousands of people gathering in the same place. And some of that is for show, but some of it really is that, people are finding it really hard to negotiate without being able to just sit down together and talk in a room, or meeting each other in a corridor between meetings and think, well, look, if we just go and get a coffee, can we settle our differences? And so it does worry me that we might have lost a few years of, action at the international level towards these big goals. We're trying to kind of keep pace with what's going on and be part of those conversations. But I really hope that the Glasgow conference that's planned for the end of the year can go ahead in some way, because I'm not sure that we can really afford another year before countries make more commitments for climate change.
Yeah, definitely. Well, hopefully with yesterday's announcement, it might be more optimistic about, the Glasgow one. Yeah,
I think Glasgow does look more optimistic in terms of the numbers of people who we, could hopefully be gathering. The question really will be what's happening in the rest of the world with the vaccination program, because if you need people to be coming together from all corners of the world to negotiate this, isn't, almost worse would be to have these negotiations happening with only the vaccinated countries there. right?
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely. So the next question is, so you work in a rapidly changing field, which you've definitely touched on, which is influenced by a variety of different agencies and industries. But your own research focus works on the intersection of politics and environmental science. So if you had the power to make one change in the world today, what would that be and why?
That was a very challenging question. Obviously, there are lots of things that I might want to change about the way the world works at the moment. But what I came down to is thinking that I really would like to get rid of the idea that there are any silver bullet solutions to environmental problems. So we often see when governments are proposing the kinds of actions that they want to take, and we can see it in the UK government's response to climate change as well, there's a focus on sort of big technologies that people hope will kind of save us. So like hydrogen fueled cars.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or something like a carbon tax, like a single thing.
Yeah.
But actually, the reality of addressing these problems, as we're finding out with Corona, is that you need multiple different kinds of small actions that are, some of them a bit tedious and some of them quite interesting, but you need the mixture. And if you just focus on one silver bullet at a time, you won't get there. So really, if I had my way, I would prevent all politicians asking for silver bullets and all scientists from designing them. So.
That's a good one. Yeah, really, really good. I think, there's definitely a tendency to think that there's kind of a one size fits all solution. It'll be just a quick fix and then you can forget about it. So yeah, definitely that's a good one. Ustinov College's tagline is local community, and global citizens, and climate change is something that clearly impacts both a local and a global level. So given that many individuals cannot affect global change alone, a common perception might be that one person couldn't make the difference. So what would you say to people who are wondering what they could do at a local level to have a more global impact? And I think you kind of touched on that in the question before. So
I think actually I do tend to feel that we sometimes ask too much of individuals acting on their own. We sometimes suggest that by turning off your lights at home or by changing your shopping habits a little bit, you'll be able to save the planet. And clearly that's not the case. But there are lots of things that we do that are part of collectives. We do work together in all sorts of different ways. And that's where I would suggest that people take most of their action if they can. So that would be, for example, about, the institution that you're part of. So, what's your college doing about its procurement? So where is it buying its food from? What kinds of meals are people eating? That's something that collectively students at Ustinov could do together. And perhaps when you move from being a student into a job or into the wonderful worlds of buying a house, holding a mortgage, having a bank account, even maybe a pension, the questions are like, why, the company or organization that you're going to work for, have you asked them what their policies are towards these kind of issues? What are they doing? And are you the kind of person who wants to join an organization that doesn't have anything to say about climate change? Or do you want to take out a mortgage from a bank that doesn't have a policy on sustainability? So it's those kinds of decisions that you can take they're individual decisions, but they're related to a bigger whole. And I think those are the decisions that I would encourage people to focus on.
Yeah, that's nice. So it's not kind of the whole burden's on you. You can kind of, affect things through your decisions.
You use your power to ask other people who've actually got the resources and the money and the capacity to do something bigger to make a change.
Yeah, definitely. So what is the greatest piece of career advice that you've been given? And what advice would you give someone who is embarking on an academic career today?
Well, definitely the greatest piece of career advice I was ever given was from my PhD supervisor, Susan Owens, who's now a retired professor from Cambridge University. And Susan told me to sleep on it. So that is the best piece of advice I've ever been asked. So she said, never make a decision about anything, whether it be where you're going to publish a paper in a journal or whether to present at a conference or, whether to take a job or not, before you've had a chance to take some distance, take a step away from it. And that's definitely been a very good piece of advice. And I think the piece of advice I would give to other people, I'm a member of a sort of an ad hoc group that we call Opportunities Anonymous, because many academics are really addicted to opportunities. You think, this is the last opportunity I'm ever going to have. This is the last chance I've got to do this thing. But actually, I think what I've learned through my career is there are so many opportunities ahead for you, and that choosing your opportunities wisely, not just jumping at it because you feel you have to. And particularly when I was a junior researcher, I think I probably took on too many different things because I felt that they would be the last chance that I'd have to do something, and probably ended up doing too much at once and maybe not all of it very well. So I would advise people that there will be more opportunities ahead, and you don't have to take all of them at once. So choose your opportunities wisely, I think, is what I would say.
Okay, that's some good advice. And then the last question. So if you could talk to yourself when you were only 21 years old, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to yourself?
Yeah, that is a hard one. I mean, I think my first advice would be that it was definitely a good idea not to take on the basketball career and to stick with academia. I think that was definitely a good choice. I was tempted at one point. I played a lot of basketball in my youth, and I was tempted at one point to play a bit more seriously. But my knees certainly wouldn't have taken that anyway. So I've done enough damage to that. So a bit more stretching, and definitely not the basketball career. But professionally, I think I probably would have said that I don't worry about making mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. Mistakes will happen. They're part of life, and don't be so concerned about making mistakes that you don't try new things out.
Mm. No, that's definitely some good advice to live by, and that we could all kind of take on board. So yeah, that concludes the interview then. That's all my questions. So thank you so much for taking the time out just to speak with us. I'm sure you're very, very busy, and you've had some very, very interesting responses to some of the questions. So yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Not at all, Arabella. Thanks for asking me, and thanks for your interesting questions. Certainly made me think. And it was a pleasure to have the time to consider these questions with you today.
Thanks, Harriet. Thanks.